Get in line, you maggots.
Yes, sir. Right away, Quran, sir. Today we are discussing the movies that shaped our view of war. Hey, it's Alex from Los Angeles.
And this is Karen from San Francisco. Welcome to Movies That Shaped Us. We are two longtime friends who grew up on opposite ends of the globe with very different backgrounds, but were both shaped and are still being shaped by the movies we see and love. In each episode, we'll cover a topic around important places, people, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through three of our favorite films. So, Alex, like you said, today's episode is all about war. Talk us through how you thought about this list and just this topic in general.
Yeah. Obviously, it's a big topic. And just again to caveat, maybe newer listeners, these lists won't be like our favorite war films, but more the three movies that again shaped our view of war and how we think about war. So just always want to make that caveat there too. Yeah. This was an interesting one to think about. There's a famous Truffaut quote that there's no such thing as an anti-war film, right? And I definitely do subscribe to that. You know, even if you're trying to show the horrors of war, it is a movie, so there will be some kind of glamorizing of it too. You just can't help it. That's just what film does. You know, and I am someone who is anti-war. Very few wars I feel are ever justified in human history. So it's a very rare thing that I feel like, okay, this is something that, you know, a war should be fought. So when I was thinking about this topic, it was thinking a lot first on there are, you know, many people that go to war and what does that do to that person? How can people prepare for that? Like I've never been in the service, never had the desire to do that. So I have no firsthand experience of it, but thinking about, okay, first of all, what mindset do you have to be in to want to do that? And then therefore when you go through that process, what would it do to you? How would it change you? And I think there's a lot of movies that deal with that. And that's how I can kind of imagine myself going through that experience by living through these characters that go through in the films. And then also what it does to societies too. I mean, I think war really does not only impact the people that are fighting it, but the entire society. I mean, that is something that, you know, that I can speak more firsthand of. I mean, I live in the United States and we've been in several wars since I was born. So I got to live through and see what the impacts of those wars have been on society. You know, I think all negative, if I want to be honest about that. So I think the movies can show too, like how that changes the war, the state of war changes every person in the populace and the society itself.
Yeah. So I don't know if people remember this, but I mentioned this before on the podcast, but I grew up in India and my dad was actually in the Indian Army. So not that I was in the service myself, but I feel like I had a pretty firsthand kind of, you know, view into his life and what it meant to go to war, because there were wars, like you said, in that region since I was born as well. So I kind of looked at this in my personal view more from the point of view of the people who were left behind. And then when my dad did come back, what did that feel like? But then also thinking about or imagining through stories that he shared of what it was like when he was there. And I'm the same way, pretty much anti-war. There's really no reason, and it usually never leads to any good. But I think the conversation is a little bit more nuanced in my mind, because the people who are fighting in these wars, they didn't ask to be there and they didn't ask not to be there either. They're just there because how the system and the ecosystem and maybe certain people at power kind of all ended up. So now that has happened, you have to sort of then figure out, okay, what does this mean? And in that sort of nuanced lens in my mind, if you're there and if the security of your people, your country and such is at stake, you have to go through it in some form or the other, you know, whether you like it or not. And that's where, you know, you could argue the glamorization and all of that comes in, but then there's also real courage and bravery and, you know, teamwork and leadership and all of that stuff that comes in as well. And I see my dad and his course mates from the army and the people that he's, you know, was in the trenches with in some form or the other. They have a lifelong bond. I've seen that through dinners and parties and what have you. There's this whole ecosystem that kind of forms around it. So, you know, growing up as a kid, I was like, oh, I don't want to be a part of any of this. But the older I get, I sort of, I don't know, can appreciate that this was hard. They probably didn't want to be there, but then once they got there, they had to make it work. And this brotherhood sort of became the survival of all of that. So all this to say, it's much more nuanced. Like all things, nothing is black or white in my mind, at least. By the way, I also want to mention that we did this episode in honor of Memorial Day that's coming up, and want to extend our gratitude and thank you to everybody around the world who have given their lives and their lives in service.
Mm-hmm. Okay, with that, let's jump into the list. So, Karan, what is your number 3 movie that shaped your view of war?
So my number 3 movie is Swing Shift, movie from 1984, starring Goldie Hawn, Kurt Russell, Christine Lahti, Ed Harris, directed by Jonathan Demme. Quick logline on the movie: a woman finds romance when she takes a job at an aircraft plant to help make ends meet after her husband goes off to war. For folks who haven't watched the movie, this movie is sort of talking about what I was referring to in a little bit ago, which is the lives of people who are left behind. And this is that time where, for the most part, women weren't in the workforce, and the war sort of forced a lot of women and other people who are left behind to go to work. So this is a story of Goldie Hawn, who starts off as a simple sort of housewife person married to Ed Harris, doesn't really have an ambition or a life of her own, and then through various events ends up going to this aircraft factory, finding a new life, falling in love with Kurt Russell on screen and off screen during the making of this movie, but more so kind of finding herself, finding her own place, forming this amazing friendship with Christine Lahti, who she views as kind of, the town tramp, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
or what have you in the beginning. But ultimately, this is sort of the beginning of feminism as well, in a way, because it's Christine Lahti that she is with at the end of the movie, not in a romantic way, but in a sisterhood kind of way.
Right,
But
right.
and then of course the complications of Ed Harris coming back, because he does come back. So what does that do to her and this whole town, really? Because they've sort of figured out a way to self-sustain themselves, So I don't know. Had you heard about this movie before or watched it?
No, I never actually heard of this, which after reading into it, because it's a super infamous movie, I was actually surprised I never heard of it. But I had never heard of it and never seen it until watching it for this podcast.
Yeah. What did you think?
Again, I did not track down the original version of the film. Someday I will, just out of a curiosity, but I definitely thought it wasn't great. Kind of very boring. And not very engaging. Other than, like, Christine Lahti was fantastic, which is a lot. Just to fill in some listeners on what I'm referring to, there was a lot of drama behind the scenes with Jonathan Demme and Goldie Hawn, who produced the picture. She was jealous that Christine Lahti's character was more liked by test audiences, and the studio came in and supposedly totally butchered the film. Which again, I never heard of any of this, but it's apparently one of the more famous studio interference pictures. So it was interesting sort of seeing that, because definitely Christine Lahti was like, blowing off the screen, like her her charisma and her energy.
Nominated.
Yeah, no, I can see why Goldie was so jealous, because I care more about her character and I'm more interested about that than I am about the whole love triangle thing, which is what the studio was forcing more onto the movie. But it was, I think, to your point about the home front, it definitely does make you think on that, for the soldiers, obviously, you can never go home again, right? They're changed. That is an experience that totally changes them. But the same thing for the people left behind. They can't go back to their old lives. She can't just, Ed Harris, return and then all of a sudden now, great, we're back to how things were before the war. War disrupts every single person involved in it, not only directly, but the family members and all the people left behind and the people working to support the war on the home front, which is definitely, I think, right, the message that you were saying earlier in the movie, earlier in the episode. I think this movie definitely shows that.
Yeah. And this is really why I put this movie, because, I have memories of my dad being away either on, an actual thing, but also like an exercise for weeks and weeks. And, we mostly lived in army cantonment areas, and we kind of formed this community with, other wives, my mom's friends, and then their kids. And we had our own routines, right? That we're going to go to school and come back, and there's a potluck happening at somebody else's place. After dinner, we're all going to go for like a long walk, like 20 of us on a walk. I mean, how
Wow,
would that
cool.
happen? But we would do this in our area.
Yeah.
Movie nights, VHSs, all the moms kind of getting together and doing some sort of army welfare
Mhm.
stuff with other, women whose husbands had been sort of injured or affected more severely through all this stuff. So, you've kind of formed a community
Mhm.
and maybe even a sense of purpose.
Mhm.
And I always remember, because in addition to that, it was always hard saying goodbye to my dad when he left. But then when he came back, it was also like, oh, okay, things are now different because
Mm.
we missed him, but we've also found our own kind of rhythm of sorts. So now we have to sort of switch back into the old rhythm, which is no
Right.
longer the old rhythm because you can't go back, obviously. So I think this movie really captures that really well. And
Mhm.
I wasn't aware of the movie's drama either after I watched the movie. I watched this movie during the pandemic because I
Oh,
kind
okay.
of got onto a Goldie Hawn kick. So I was
Ah.
like, oh, I'd never seen some of her older movies. So I was like, oh,
Mhm.
let me do that because she's just such a great performer.
She
And,
is. Yeah.
and I agree, like Christine Lahti kind of ends up stealing the movie. But I don't know. I've watched this movie a couple of times, and yes, her arc, Christine Lahti's arc, is more interesting, but there's something about the understatedness of Goldie Hawn's character and her
Mhm.
arc.
Mhm.
And even though some of the story beats don't fully add up, like why is she going with this guy and what is happening and how is she opening up and why? But I don't know. There's something understated about that, which I really liked. It doesn't have to be big acting. I mean, Christine Lahti, not that she's hamming, but that's sort of
Right.
big acting. It's very obvious, right? But I think what Goldie and Kurt Russell are doing, their chemistry is incredible. And
Mhm.
then the world building, like we always talk about on this podcast, is amazing. I mean, it's Jonathan Demme. So,
Yeah, exactly.
from the camera work to the production design, like you are really transported. So I didn't find this movie boring at all. I found it very engaging, maybe because I have a personal connection
Mhm.
with it. There's something, I don't know, the malaise of the movie is how it felt like,
Mm.
because there wasn't much going on in, when
Yeah.
sort of you're living that way. And these routines were not big routines. They were very simple routines. You went to school, you came back, and you did the things like I was talking about. So,
Mhm.
you know, I'm guessing it's the byproduct of the trouble nature of the production, but it ends up capturing a truth in a weird way, at least for me.
Yeah, I don't think Goldie Hawn does a bad job at all, and I
No,
think I don't obviously I wasn't on the set and don't know exactly, all the issues that they were having, and I have not again seen. Have you seen the Demi version of this that's floating around online?
oh no,
Okay. Yeah, I haven't either yet, but at some day I do want to check it out because
yeah,
you can watch his basically working print of what this movie was, and it's apparently a much
interesting.
stronger film because it's not. I think the studio and Goldie were trying to focus more on the love triangle aspect of it, and Demi was trying to tell a wider picture. And a lot of the
Right,
characters, like Holly Hunter's character, who's barely in the movie, has like whole
barely.
backstories, and they deal a lot more with what I was actually more interested in, which is the life of all these women that are now
Yeah,
in the factory and what that was like. And instead of this very melodramatic love triangle, which could be in sort of any movie, it wasn't necessarily have to be
yeah,
a movie about the home front of World War II. I was more interested in the home front of World War II piece, which
yeah,
I think for you resonated. It sounds like stronger because you
yeah.
lived a lot of the similar experiences of
Exactly. There's
that.
enough there that I can pick
Right.
from it. But
Exactly.
yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. I mean, I'm sure the other version, the unbattered version, is a richer movie. But yeah, this is not a masterpiece by any means, but I also kind of liked it.
Yeah,
It's sweet.
is yeah, nothing,
And
nothing, nothing wrong with that.
yeah,
And I'm glad I now heard about it because again, it is sort of with the trouble production piece. At some point, I'm always curious to look at different cuts of movies,
yeah,
and just as a curiosity of like, oh, what sort of happened here? What were the creative decisions that were made? Who was making them? Just because I'm interested in
yeah.
that kind of development process of the film. So now I have another work print to track down to try to check out and see
Yeah.
like what the other version of the film was.
Me too. I didn't know there was one, so I want to check it out too. Yeah, because there is like a very rich movie in there.
Mm-hmm.
I could even tell without knowing anything about the history of this movie. So Now I want to see that as well.
Yeah, we'll have to do maybe another episode on comparing different cuts of movies or something, because now this is on my top of my list of curiosity factors to check out.
Yeah, yeah. All right. What is your next, or your first, rather?
Yes, my number 3 film that shaped my view of war is Full Metal Jacket from 1987. So this is a film directed by Stanley Kubrick, starring Matthew Modine, Vincent D'Onofrio, and R. Lee Emery. The IMDb plot summary: a pragmatic U.S. Marine observes the dehumanizing effects the Vietnam War has on his fellow recruits, from their brutal boot camp training to the bloody street fighting in Vietnam. So I chose this film, and this film, like I mentioned before, like I've never been in the army or at war. And what this movie, I think, helped me kind of put myself in the mindset of someone going off to war and what that process might be like, especially when it comes to the training that you have to go through. And this movie is a movie in 2 parts. There's a whole first half that's about the Marine training camp, and you get to see what that experience is like, which is something that, you know, I'm assuming is authentic, and I've read is. That I've never obviously experienced this. So it's a way for me to see, okay, this would what it would be like to be, you know, a Marine going through training. And then the second half is the Marines in the front, and, you know, fighting in the war. And you see how they were changed by that training camp that they were in, and then how they then respond in the front because of how they were conditioned in the training camp. So while it was mainly the first part of the film that helped me sort of understand, okay, well, this is what it must be like, and this is what it would be like if I was in that situation, like Matthew Modine, and sort of going through and getting programmed to be a soldier, more so than second half, which I actually really do like too. I think the 2 halves of the movies need to talk to one another, but it's really this first half was the first time in a film I'd ever seen a training camp where they put this much emphasis on that part of it, and really started thinking, oh wow, like that's what it would be like. And now I sort of have a more understanding of when the soldiers then go off to war, sort of what their mental state is in, and how they're, you know, stripped of their own individuality, and then, you know, put in this Marine sort of headspace. So had you seen this film before?
No, I'd not seen this film before. Obviously, know of it very well because it's Kubrick. Yeah, this was an interesting watch. I struggled with this movie quite a bit. And I think part of it is the first half of it. I understand the brutality, and I understand kind of the stripping of the identity, like you said. But because it's sort of shown in such a real, almost like documentary kind of way, I can't imagine there being no levity or camaraderie between these people at all. And that's totally stripped away. And that would be fine if this movie was sort of, you know, had like a different tonality, but because it feels so real, it almost feels inauthentic to me that this is how it was, like all day, every day. These people didn't even have a conversation. They didn't even share a joke. They didn't even have anything else going on, which seems totally unreal to me because it's still human beings at the end of the day. And then secondly, I found the performances, like especially Vincent D'Onofrio's portrayal, like a school play acting, like
oh really
bad.
Oh, okay.
This whole kind of thing in the bathroom and the, you know, his final scene and such, like all of it just didn't. I mean, I kept wondering as an audience, I'm supposed to be like shattered by this, but I just wasn't invested to be, for whatever reason. And maybe it's because it was such a one-dimensional portrayal of these people that of course, I mean, it felt bad to see that happen, but it didn't, you know, I didn't feel gutted the way I probably should have felt, because part of it also is the performance. It's just very school play like performance, at least to me. So, and then when we get to the second part, that's where at least the filmmaking and stuff shows up. And I was like, oh, this looks amazing and what have you. And the movie starts to kick into a different gear. But I don't know. Overall, maybe I'm also like, you know, because everybody, including you, and rightfully so, is sort of Kubrick's whatever. And maybe I have too much of that baggage in my mind now, because I haven't watched all of his stuff. And I was like, that's sort of what I walked away with. The filmmaking is amazing for sure. But I don't know, the movie lacks a soul, which I think is pretty important to make it authentic. You don't need so much of that maybe in the second half, and the second half worked better for me.
Oh, interesting.
Not the first half.
Yeah, so I again view the first half as their souls are getting stripped out. Right. Like there's even a line that the drill instructor has of, a gun is only a tool. You need a hard heart to kill. And it's like, how do you get in the mindset where you will go off somewhere else and murder someone you don't know? And that's something I just struggle with even myself. Like, I don't understand how I could ever do that. But then you watch this and you see, oh, okay, well, they have to, strip the opening scene where they're all getting their head shaved. There's kind of like they're going back to looking like babies because they're just little kids who know nothing, and their brains are sort of emptied out of all their individuality and all of their, what identified them as themselves, and then instead poured in this like formula of, okay, well, this is your rifle, this is what you do, it's all the things that you need to just be a killer, which is what, again, the drill sergeant is telling them. So I think that's probably why they decided not to make this about, the camaraderie. Oh, everyone's a boot camp. We're having a good time. It's like, no. Like it
doesn't have to be a good
very,
time.
very difficult.
It can just be real. And I would also say like show some more battalions with other trainers and such too. I mean, this, because it's so quote unquote authentically portrayed, and even you sort of said this is how it must be. Like not all trainers are, racist or what have you. It's sort of I don't know, because it's portrayed so authentically. I feel like such movies have this danger of making people think, oh, this is how all of it is. It always is this way. And I'm sure there's a lot of truth in that, but I don't know. It's just didn't land very well on me.
Interesting.
How you would kind of portray just a very one-sided sort of point of view on something, but again, it's all about the tonality and the way it's shown, right? Don't make it look like a documentary if you're not going to show a more three-dimensional portrayal of what you're trying to do, is what I think.
I see. Yeah. I mean, I wasn't looking for, I thought that the portrayal that, and again, maybe again, never been in the Army, and I'm sure they don't do this anymore in terms of the drill instructors. Like this was in the 60s, but they didn't. I mean, the actor who played that role he was going a lot from his real experience. He was a drill instructor, who's not an actor. And then he sort of became one after this movie, and just an incredible performance. I mean, though, again, you say, is it a performance? Because he's just doing the thing he's probably been doing for a long time.
He's very effective,
but just like such an incredible, really stands out to me. I was like, that's now in my mind, like a drill instructor is what he does there.
Right.
The other thing that strikes me a lot about this film too, that I think about, is the fact that it's all about, right, like how do you get someone to kill, right? Like get them in that mindset. But the kills that are in this movie, there's really kind of three that they focus on. And neither of those three kills that they have are some sort of glamorized, what you would imagine in your mind. Like the first one is a murder. Second one's a suicide. And then the third one is a mercy killing when they kill the young girl at the end who's dying and asking to be killed. So it really does, with Kubrick's stance on violence, which his opinion through his films is that violence makes us human, which I disagree with actually personally, but he thinks that is a very important part of humanity is violence and how we deal with that. But I just think this film as a war film is very interesting. Again, I do agree that there's no such thing as an anti-war film, but that the killings that they focus on are not killings that you would expect in a war film. It's usually some, glorious kill and they got the enemy and it's something we can celebrate. Right. None of those kills are celebrated at all in the film. Even the mercy killing at the end when they killed their supposed enemy of this, this girl who was a sniper attacking them. And I think that, again, just sort of makes me think more about how it must, again, assumptions I'm making, that it must be like that. I mean, I'm sure it's hard to struggle with this, even in the, when you're told that's the enemy over there and kill them. It can't be that easy where you just do it and then kind of move on. You must have some kind of psychological struggle in that. And I do like that they focused on these three killings of not being anything glamorized or heroic at all. They're not the killings they're being trained to do, right? They're being trained to go out there and, kill the enemy, but instead it's a murder, suicide, and then a mercy killing, not anything their training taught them. And that always resonated a lot with me too, about like, wow, like, yeah, this is not going to be an easy thing. Even if you go through this training that is trying to help you make it easier for you to do this, it's still never easy because, violence, I personally don't think is something that is part of what makes us human. So we have to struggle with that. And I think a war and killing in that sense is a very difficult thing, I would imagine, to have to deal with. Again, I can't speak to that personally, but after watching this film, that just makes me think those things.
Yeah, which is where the second part works much better, at least for me, because it doesn't glamorize, even though it's technically beautiful and brilliant to look at as a movie, but it's not glamorized. It's pretty horrific, and you sort of really feel like you're there. uh, dealing with these folks and their pain and all of it. So I think that was pretty effective.
Yeah, I think you're the first person I've ever met that liked the second half better than the first. Usually
Really?
you're like this sort of the mainstream opinion on this movie is like first half masterpiece, second half flawed. So it's just interesting to hear the other. I think both halves are perfect and they need one another. You know, the mainstream sort of opinion's always like the second half, it sort of falls off. So it's just interesting that you had this a different opinion. It's cool hearing that.
I think I go back to the performances from especially Vincent D'Onofrio, not to pick on him.
Just didn't work for you. Yeah.
It just didn't work. I was like, oh my gosh, now I'm bad. That was sort of the performance in my mind. It just didn't work on me. And that was the letdown.
Well, hopefully he's not listening or takes offense to that.
Probably
hopefully he is listening. It just, isn't too offended by that.
No.
He's got a great career. He's on the Law and Order shows.
Fine.
I think he's doing
he's
okay.
Fine. He's fine. Doesn't need my approval. And also these people are all very young, and I don't consider Kubrick as a master of actor directors anyway.
Oh, really? So, interesting.
But this is based on my limited view of his movies.
We'll have to unpack that in a future episode. I think that could be a whole other discussion. Okay, let's move on to your number 2 film that shaped your views on war. What do you got?
All right. So my next is Inglourious Basterds from 2009, directed by QT, the one and only Quentin Tarantino, starring Brad Pitt, Diane Kruger, Eli Roth, Melanie Laurent, Christoph Waltz, Fassbender, Daniel Brühl, a whole bunch of folks. Quick logline. In Nazi-occupied France during World War II, a plan to assassinate Nazi leaders by a group of Jewish US soldiers coincides with a theater owner's vengeful plans for the same. I would think most people have watched this movie, so I probably wouldn't go into too much depth of other than what the logline says. But I put this movie mainly because as horrific and pointless, like we said, war can be, if you have to be in those shoes, what do you do? How do you actually then take on the enemy and do what you have to do? This is sort of what this movie symbolizes for me. Again, not, condoning that in any way, but if you're there, then you're there. You have to do what it takes. And in this case, defeating the Nazis and such had to be done. So I think this movie captures that. And on top of it, I know it's sort of weird to even say this about a war movie dealing with such horrific subjects. It's really fun.
Definitely is. Yeah.
This is probably the movie that got me onto Tarantino in a big way. I hadn't seen all of his stuff, but then it sort of made me more curious. I think it's probably his most mainstream movie, I would think. So I think that worked on me. But curious, I'm sure you've seen this, had seen this before.
I saw this opening weekend. Huge Tarantino fan, especially at the time, and I really enjoyed it. I think, and in terms of his overall filmography, it's sort of middle to back end for me, but I still think it's a fantastic film. Great performances, a great suspense, and just like you said, it is fun. I mean, I think he's harkening back to those Men on a Mission, World War II films from the 60s and 70s, Dirty Dozen, Battle of the Bulge, Guns of Navarone, and those are all fun adventure movies, and that's the tone I think he's trying to take in this.
Yeah, I totally agree. And then the whole suspense and thriller aspect of it is actually, that's what makes it fun in a way. And then, I know he's gotten a lot of criticism for like revisionist storytelling and history making, maybe even making light of certain things that are so horrific, like the Holocaust and such. But and those, frustrations or criticisms are obviously justified for whoever feels that way. But to me, it sort of always felt that he's very aware of all the stuff that has happened and how bad it is. But that said, like you said, I agree with that too. There's no anti-war film per se.
Right.
And this one, because of its fun nature and the vengeance aspect of it, it actually ends up glorifying war even more. Some might argue, and I might argue too. So it's complicated for sure. That on one moment you sort of catch yourself, putting your fists up in the air that, oh yeah, he got the bad guys. But then very quickly, right, the next second, you're then left with, oh, what does this actually mean? Did you actually get them? And even if you got them, there's so much other stuff at stake now that has to be dealt with, and we're still dealing with that in
Hmm.
real life. So,
Yeah.
it's complicated.
No, it definitely is. And actually, you mentioned the vengeance aspect of this film. And actually, on this rewatch, so I hadn't seen the movie in maybe like 4 years. I enjoy it. I put it on every so often. But
Mm,
that theme of it really stood out to me kind of for the first time, which is sort of weird because like I think Quentin Tarantino, every movie of his deals with revenge in some way. Like
right.
that is a theme that runs through his entire filmography. And personally, I feel that like revenge is a terrible thing, and that
Yeah.
it's a very evil, I don't know, emotion or whatever you want to call it.
Motivation.
Motivation, right? It's a very bad motivation and
Yeah.
something that is never justified. And I think it's interesting, especially in the context of a war film, where the entire plot is just around people getting revenge on other people. And then I was thinking too about a lot of American wars that were fought for unjust reasons. They would invent these causes of revenge. Oh, we need to get revenge because of the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which was a fake reason to start the Vietnam War, the sinking of the Maine, which is a fake reason to start the Spanish American War. So like revenge is something that's easy to like, play off that emotion for those in power to get wars started. And that's never I just think revenge is not something that's ever justified, even though it makes for great films. I'm not knocking the
Yeah.
Tarantino films at all, but it's just interesting seeing that element play in every single one of the characters' motivations in this, even down to the squad of the Jewish Americans who are essentially just going to kill Nazis to get revenge for
Yeah.
the Holocaust. There's no other motivation other than that. And the farm girl in the beginning of the film is just trying to get revenge on the fact that they killed her family, and it's all just vengeance, which is just I get it. It just for some reason struck me on this rewatch that, oh wow, okay, so he's trying to say war as vengeance in a very, very clear way, which
Yeah.
is just an interesting take because yeah, war I think sold as vengeance is a dangerous thing.
It is, but then that's what makes it complicated because, what are you going to do if, at some point you also have to fight back, or are you just going to take it? But at some point, yeah, the lines, at least in my mind, between vengeance and that being the sole motivation
Mm-hmm.
versus the bigger picture, like that's just a very difficult balance to strike. Like I don't think I can even comment on that because
Mm-hmm.
I've not really been in these shoes per se. But I agree with you. Like, it's not ultimately vengeance is not going to get you
Anywhere.
anything.
Yeah, right. Which is interesting too, I think, in Tarantino's films. He is trying to show catharsis from that, which I'm sure
Yeah.
there is catharsis, a little bit of catharsis in vengeance,
Yeah.
but that wears off. And then, was that saying about you dig two graves? Isn't there one about you go to seek, if you want to go off and seek revenge, dig two graves, one for you and one for the person that you're trying to revenge? There's some
Right.
saying I should have
Right.
I think it was even referenced in Kill Bill. But I thought for some reason that struck me in this viewing as I was thinking about this more along the lines of war. And the other thing I think this film does really well too is like the propaganda aspect of it
Hmm.
too, and how he's trying to show how films can be propaganda.
Yeah.
Where there's a whole subplot of the Nazi film that they're screening, right? That is a pure propaganda film. And then in the same token, I think he's trying to comment on his own film as propaganda too, because the villains are very one-sided, one note.
Right.
They're not trying to complicate it all. It's like, okay, great, how many more Germans can we kill? That's great. In the same way that the German character in that sniper film, that's the propaganda film in the universe, he's just killing a bunch of allied
Right.
soldiers, and it's also just chalking them up. So I do think that he is very smart and knows what he's doing, Quentin,
Very
in that
smart.
in that sense, that the film is also a propaganda film, much like the film in the film is a
Right.
propaganda film. And that's why he's Quentin Tarantino and he's brilliant. That he can
Yeah.
play on all those different levels, but it also just works as a super fun adventure war film because it
Yeah.
really is. I mean, the performances in this, you can tell all the actors are just having such a great time
Yeah.
in what they're
Especially
doing.
Brad Pitt.
Oh my gosh, Brad Pitt, just one of his best performances. I feel when he's trying to do the Italian accent every time,
Amazing.
I just laugh for like 10 minutes. Like that's one of the funniest things to ever be put on film by Brad Pitt for sure.
I couldn't agree more. Um, yeah, the propaganda stuff is amazing. And that's sort of the interesting part of this, right? Like this, everything people are doing in their lives is from their own context and their own lives.
Mm-hmm.
The Daniel Bruhl character and everybody around him, he's a war hero for
Right,
everybody,
right, right.
but if you look at it from a pure execution outcome standpoint, the other people who are killing for their reasons, it's the end output is the same for everybody. You're just
Right.
killing people,
Right.
right? So it's sort of interesting that how that is. And yeah, they're war heroes on this side, but they also think that they're war heroes. It's so interesting and fascinating in that regard.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting too. That he shows so much. They show so much of the adoration that he has amongst the German folks and the Nazi sympathizers, and it doesn't make you think, yeah, like everyone, the sides of the war, they're all the same in terms of what they, what their propaganda is, what they valorize. It's all the same thing. It's just on the other side, and that's we're all humans,
Exactly. Yeah. All right. So what's your number 2?
My number 2 film is actually another Stanley Kubrick film. I couldn't help but put 2 on the same list. So hopefully people aren't sick of him already. But this film is Paths of Glory from 1957. Again, directed by Kubrick, starring Kirk Douglas. The plot summary from IMDb: after refusing to attack an enemy position, a general accuses soldiers of cowardice, and their commanding officer must defend them. And to add a little more context in that too, in case folks haven't heard of this film, this is a film set during World War I, and Kirk Douglas plays a French soldier. So it's from the perspective of the French military, and they're trying to attack a German position, and the soldiers basically refuse to attack, and then they get prosecuted in military court, essentially, for refusing to obey orders. So give a little context around that one, because I think this film, while it is I think Kubrick's first masterpiece, it's not as well known as some of his other films. And for me, this film, I saw it for the first time in college, a little late in my Kubrick exploration. And it really resonated on me because it, for the first time, helped show to me that war is really a reflection of class divisions in society. And it is not really a thing that unites everyone around one flag. There are still those very strong divisions between the ruling class, in this film exemplified through the officers, and then the working class or middle class or lower classes, however you want to call it, represented by the soldiers. And I never really thought of war like that before. And this film, for the first time, made me say, oh, wow, like this is just another extension of, the class war that is going on in the background too. So before getting into too much more of that, Eddie, had you seen this film before, and what were your thoughts on it?
No, I hadn't seen it. So this was a really great way for me
to,
nice.
Okay.
Continue my Kubrick exploration.
Yeah.
This movie blew me away. This is a real masterpiece. So I was very happy to, and I would even correct myself, and I saved that for this time, which is that this is like beautifully performed across the board by every single person that's in the movie. So yeah, Kubrick knows what he's doing. That little old chap.
Yeah, he knew his way around a movie set and a movie camera.
Yeah,
So yeah,
again, with actors. Exactly. I'm speaking about the actors part specifically. Those things I always knew.
Yeah. Well, he definitely had his way around the actors in this movie, if you know what I'm saying, because his wife was the singer at the end. He met her on the set of this and ended up marrying her 50 years. So he definitely knew his way around actors a little bit on this movie.
I did not know that. Wow, that's an amazing scene.
Yeah.
It's interesting you say that about the class and the hierarchy. I guess I always knew that, sort of growing up in that
right
atmosphere of like, you definitely have a very different life and the way you're treated if you're an officer's family and a senior officer's family versus if you're somebody lower on the ranks. And in fact, this used to be my number one thing about, at least as a teenager, of why I didn't want to be involved in any of that, because the lines of class and almost sort of the sycophancy and such that came with it, with all these ceremonies and parades and rules and things, just felt very stifling and just unnecessary to me. That is, if the main purpose of this is to protect the people and the country, why are we spending all this time in all the shenanigans, which are all just to, preserve the class hierarchy of this whole ecosystem. But then as I get older, again, not condoning it in any way, but more like, without that, this system will totally fall apart.
In the military, also. Yeah, right, for sure.
In the military.
Yes, right.
Because it's such a, how do you even justify, like we've been talking, for somebody to leave their family and their home with no real training, no real skill, to show up and basically kill people and know that you're going to get killed as well.
Right.
How do you
Right.
motivate yourself to do that? And of course, there is, patriotism and all of those things.
Mhm.
But a big part of that is this ecosystem of class and hierarchy. Like without that, this doesn't work. There has to be somebody calling the shots in a
Mhm.
brutal kind of way, and everybody else sort of blindly following it. And it's obviously, there's a lot of great nuance there of like leadership and camaraderie and motivation and what have you, but there's a lot of other stuff at play too. So I think this movie just does an amazing job at, in a very nuanced way, showing all of that.
Mhm.
And yeah, Kirk Douglas and his cause and the court martial of it all is just incredible. And especially the other general who at one point orders his own people to shoot his own people.
Right. Because just to get them to move, because they weren't
Oh
they
my
weren't moving.
goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that right there sort of blows it all out of the ballpark in terms of who is this for?
Right.
You're ready to kill your own people. Isn't the whole point to protect your own people? So
right. Actually, his whole motivation, there's a great in the opening scenes when the higher general is saying, "Hey, we have this mission. It's to attack this crazy German position." He's like, "You know what? I don't know. My men are going to die. I don't want to do this." And he's like, "Well," the other guy's like, "Well, there's a promotion in it for you, though, if you do this." And he's like, "Oh, okay. Well, then, yeah, let's do. I think my men can do it." It's just he's very self-motivated, as the ruling class typically are, where all it is about his own ascension up the throne. And again, I definitely agree with you about, one of the reasons why the military never looked good to me, because I don't necessarily like hierarchy myself, but I do believe in that respect, you need that. You have to have a hierarchy in a sense of order in a military. What I think this movie, or at least how I view it as, is it's like using the military as a microcosm for the entire of society. And it's sort of showing that, this is how we act even outside of the military. And then that's sort of what, at least I view this film's attacking more than anything else than the hierarchy in the military, which I agree with you. You need that. If you don't have that, an undisciplined military is not going to help you in any way, shape, or form. But that doesn't mean that has to translate to how we run the whole rest of our society.
Exactly. And the movie just does such an amazing job at showing that. I actually didn't know that the bulk of this movie is actually not on the battlefield. I just assumed that this will be some like really brutal, battle movie, but it's not, which was amazing. And then, like masterpieces and great directors, like none of this is tied in a pretty little bow. You keep seeing layers and layers, like the other top ranking general who ends up seemingly getting the problem as Kirk Douglas approaches him and such, but that final sort of breakfast scene or whatever meal they're having or he's having, and the final conversation is just so revealing. And they're almost like celebrating the people who are court-martialed and shot.
Exactly.
And that was still a shock to me, because I kept waiting that, there'll be an announcement at the very end that they'll say, "Oh, no, we're not going to go through this," But of course, they go through it, and then it's just like another day. They're just celebrating this. And on the heels of that, Kirk Douglas, a little bit later, is offered a promotion because, and that sort of is the system, as we were just talking.
Right.
And then all of this happens, and then the song by Kubrick's Wife that I didn't know about until this moment is singing, and that scene is also so powerful. Of first they're kind of, lewd and rude and kind of booing her, but also, kind of cheering her at her own expense. But then there's this whole moment of all the soldiers just sort of feeling that, oh, something really bad has happened here. And in some ways, looking at her crying, being put in this uncomfortable situation, is a reflection of their own lives. And they're sort of united in this whole aspect of being helpless, really.
Exactly. Yeah. Just to unpack that scene a little bit more, too, for folks who haven't seen it. It's at a restaurant bar. Like, there's all these French soldiers there, really rambunctious. And they bring in essentially like a captive German barmaid. Like, she's doesn't want to be there. She's crying. She's forced then to sing. And when she sings this folk song, I sort of view that as, okay, here's again a member of the lower class on the enemy, singing a folk song, which is again associated with more of like the lower and working classes. They're the ones who sing the folk songs, and then all the rest of these soldiers all of a sudden feel a kinship. And I view that as a class kinship of like, oh, there's also the working class on the other side, on the German side. We can unite with them because we're actually all the same. The real enemies are the commanders and the ruling class and the people that kind of push them into this situation. At least maybe that's too much of a class reductionist reading of the ending. I know a lot of people interpret the ending in very many different ways. Of it's a depressing ending, it's a happy ending, but I sort of see it as an ending of like solidarity amongst both of the two sides.
Yeah,
of the war.
Class is a part of it, but I think to me it's more about just people who are helpless. Like her situation and their situation is actually not that different. They just lost 3 of their men, you know, for no fault of their own. And they know at the back of their minds that war isn't over after this, whatever weird celebration that we are in, which is not a celebration, by the way. We have to pick up our stuff and go do this all over again. So I think there's a class thing, but there's also a situational, circumstantial solidarity that we are all just helpless in this. And then Kirk Douglas's character is an interesting midpoint, right? That he is part of the ruling class, in some ways.
He is. He's an officer. Yeah.
He's an officer, but I think there's nuance there. And this is why this movie is not one-dimensional like the other one, because you show here's somebody who is of that class, but sees the truth and has the heart and actually cares about his people and is willing to sacrifice his own career, his own motivations as much as possible.
His own life. He offers up at one point. He says, kill me instead of these soldiers. And they're like, oh, no, this is not for officers. We can't punish officers. We have to punish the grunts, the soldiers. So, and that great moment too, you talked about when they had that dinner scene at the end, when the general basically says, oh, I thought you get promotion. I thought this is why you were doing this in the first place. And Douglas is like, wait a second. No. I was doing this because I'm trying to care about my men. I don't care about my promotion. And the general's actually mad at him more at that point. And in the entire movie, it's like, wait a second, like you're not in this just to climb the ladder like the rest of us 1%ers. Like, what's going on here? Like you're then get out of here. Like I don't like you anymore because you're not just throwing your soldiers into the fire just to move your career forward. But yeah, the Kirk Douglas character is so fascinating in this movie, and just he does fantastic performance.
Great performance.
Just in the war scene. Yeah, it's not a big war scene, but there is a scene in the beginning, just so well shot. And just epic and just incredible. I expected
right from this movie, but I think what really caught me by surprise was the nuance of it and the storytelling and the emotionality at every single point. This movie could be made today, honestly.
Agreed.
Not just as like technical brilliance, but also for the way it handles emotionality and storytelling, those aspects as well. But yeah, I think Kirk Douglas's character is critical because if you remove him, this movie becomes one note.
Exactly.
It's about, lower class versus upper class. You need, because this is what makes it truthful, because they're good people trying to do their best no matter where they might be. And they also show the quote unquote soldier, lower class, the guy who's kind of a coward.
Right.
You show that too. Like not everybody is gallant. Not everybody is sort of there for the right reasons. So it's such a three-dimensional picture of humanity, which is amazing. I thought, and then of course Kirk Douglas has to go fight as well after all of this, and that's how the movie ends. That I kept waiting that is he going to just walk away or quit, but that's another commentary that you actually can't quit either. Where are you going to go? I don't think he's not going to get the promotion, but he has to fight just whatever he has after all of this with the same people above and below.
Right. And whether that's cowardice or what, like he is just, I guess, reserved to,
it's commitment. Well, this is what's going on. I think it's sense of duty as well, but also no choice.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, he could have ran away, I guess, right? I mean, it depends on like duty to what and at the expense of what, but clearly we don't really know a lot about his backstory in terms of why he's fighting anyway, which, I mean, that was a war that was heavily propagandized on both sides, and I'm sure very easy to get swept up in that. But I think that what makes his character interesting, that he is sort of, like, look, like, I know I'm sending these guys back out to die again. The last line is, oh, you going out to the front tomorrow? And he said, don't tell him now. But he basically walking away knowing that probably everyone in that restaurant's going to be dead. the next day,
Yeah.
but he can only try to protect his men. I think that's sort of where it comes down to with him. Like, he just wants to protect his guys, and that's the best he can do in the situation.
That's the best he can do. Exactly.
Yeah.
What a great movie.
Yeah, definitely recommend for folks who haven't seen this one. I think it is Kubrick's first true masterpiece. I came to it a little later in my exploration of Kubrick. It's not as well known as Strangelove or Clockwork Orange or 2001 or Full Metal Jacket, but it's definitely in that pantheon, in my opinion. So I'm glad you saw it.
So.
Okay, I think we're on to your number one. What do we got, Karan, for your number one film that shaped your view of war?
All right, so my number one is The Best Years of Our Lives from 1946, directed by William Wyler, starring Myrna Loy, Dana Andrews, Friedrich Mark, Teresa Wright. Quick logline from IMDb: 3 World War II veterans, 2 of them traumatized or disabled, return home to the American Midwest to discover that they and their families have been irreparably changed. So we've been talking about the impact of war, just not on the soldiers and the men who were there, but sort of on everybody in society. And I think this movie is my number one because it sort of shows the full spectrum of the impact of war, not just on the people left behind, but also the people who came back and trying to reintegrate in society and trying to figure out who they are. But before I go any deeper, I know you had not watched this movie before.
That's correct.
So how was this watch for you?
Yeah, a movie I'd always wanted to see, but just never got around to seeing. So I was very glad to see this on your list. I thought it was a very powerful movie that I really enjoyed. Not perfect. I think there's some things that keep it from being like a masterpiece for me, but it just was very timeless in a way that I thought was important to go back, because this movie was made very recently after the end of World War II. And I think a lot of the times with World War II, especially in the United States and the movies that depict it, they kind of glamorize a lot of aspects of it. And this movie to come out right after the war and really talk about the hard truths of what it was like to fight and the problems and coming back. And these are things that aren't really touched on in a lot of, at least the World War II films I was watching growing up. I just found it really powerful. They were able to make these comments so soon after the end of the war in terms of what they were covering here. And that really resonated with me and made it even more powerful. These are real things they were dealing with right then and there. Probably half the people in the audience when they were seeing this movie came back from World War II, right? Maybe even more than half. And they're seeing these, very realistic, I would assume, depictions of what that was like. So I can't even imagine being in that scenario. And I thought it was very, in a weird way, kind of brave or bold, maybe the better word for it, to make a film like this so soon after the war. Instead of just sort of either move on or glamorize, oh, coming back, you get the hero's welcome, everything's great, I'm now get my little house and picket fence. No, it was not like that,
No, I couldn't agree more. And so moving. I watched this movie a few times, and all I think about when I watch this movie, just people in that time sitting in a theater watching this movie and watching their lives and their confusions represented on the screen. What would that must have felt like? Kind of amazing. But yeah, I think there is a melodramatic aspect of the movie for sure, as is the case with a lot of movies from that time. But despite that, I think it's able to get at the truth of so many of these questions, whether there's another war lurking behind the corner, or is there going to be a depression? What's going to happen to jobs? Because people who are left behind, they have job security now. All these soldiers have come back. They're going to take away all the jobs. Right. That's how other people are feeling. Meanwhile, for the soldiers themselves, there's PTSD, there's relationship with their families. They have been altered mentally and physically, emotionally, and life is not the same for them. So how do you, like you said, how do you come back and fit in with your families? And then for the families who also have somehow figured out a rhythm without these men, their sons, their husbands, and some of them are better, some of them are not better at all. And now they're trying to figure out as well, how do they make room for these people who've just come back? So, and it's just so smart in that way that they show, once again, going back to the class side, like there are 3 people and their stories and lives, and they're all from different classes. They all are facing different kinds of issues. And the movie is very smart, I think, about showing that whole spectrum.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I felt the same way too. And what there was some just like really couple really moving scenes. The
Oh yeah.
actor who's a where it wasn't even an actor, it was a guy who was a soldier and he lost both of his arms in a training exercise, I think in like North Carolina or something. So he has these hooks for hands and he plays
Yeah.
a soldier who lost his limbs overseas. Him dressing himself and just knowing that that was what he had to deal with every day because he actually is not a special effect. That is his life. And then another scene, which I thought maybe this was going to be the ending of the movie, was just incredible. One of the soldiers kind of going to a plane graveyard of all these old warplanes that they're dismantling because society doesn't need them anymore. And he's sitting in this plane as a thing that society doesn't need anymore either. You were a soldier, you fought in the war, now you're back, we don't need you, you're just going to be dismantled essentially like these planes. And this is the tracking shot pulling back and you're seeing him in that cockpit being like, wow, like what a symbol, what it must have felt like to come back to a world that has moved on without you in a way. And how can you fit back in? You can't go home again in every sense of the word. And society's basically saying, you know what, maybe don't even need you. Like we were dealing fine actually on the home front without you guys. And your purpose is to fight. And now maybe you don't have a purpose anymore, which is really those two moments, especially were like super powerful that I think hold up even for any war. I'm sure this is something that veterans are dealing with.
I couldn't agree more. And also the scene at the soda shop or the pharmacy, wherever Dana Andrews works, and one of the guys who shows up who's a patron and is wearing an American flag, but is almost like poo-pooing and looking down upon the soldiers who've come back. And to your point, kind of vocalizing that we don't really need you people.
Right.
Which is sort of the breaking point for Dana Andrews' character.
Yeah, was that the scene too where he was saying you should have fought the Russians? Like, what were you doing? Like, you were fighting the wrong guys. And it's like, I'm sure that stuff was at the time. That must have been emotions people were feeling. When like you just going over there and defeat the Nazis, and now they're mad at you for not fighting the Russians who were our allies the whole time and helped us win the war. Like, but I bet that was real, and that's what I love about this movie. I assume because it was made so soon afterwards, this is not whitewashing anything. This is real stuff that they were dealing with.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, you know, at least from my point of view, it's the movie's strength because it's rooted in family. It has this sort of extra layer to it that you immediately have an in on all these people's psyches and the problems that they're dealing with internally, but also in society at large, because you're now connected. You can see yourself in Myrna or the daughter or the son or everybody, you know. Otherwise, if those were not there and it was just these three men coming back, that would be a very different movie if they were just wandering around on their own. And, you know, trying to talk through what they're dealing with. But I think by grounding them in these family stories and community stories, it all just feels so real. This could be happening right now, actually.
Oh, I'm sure it is. Right. And the other strength, and, you know, I think this is sort of the criticism I would have of the film is it's a little long and a little overly melodramatic.
3 hours didn't
a little too much. Yeah, with all the romance stories, but at the same time, I think touching off of your point about the families, what makes the end of this film actually optimistic and makes me feel you know, better than it ended with the guy in the plane sort of saying you're disregarded, is that I found that each one of these men who came back, it's falling in love and finding that love at the home front that helps heal their wounds, or at least puts them on the path to healing. They were trying to use alcohol or trying to use their job and all these other ways to feel useful and like they were back and that they were healed. And this movie, each one of them, it's love that actually gets them through it, which just shows that it is about the people that care about you and your families and, you know, romantic partners. And that is the only thing, as horrific as war is, the antidote to war can be love. And that's what we need to show compassion to these folks coming back and try to be there for them and show them that love to help them through this. And whether they make it or not, like some people can't even get through the horrors of that. But I thought that was a really powerful ending too, having the wedding be at the end and each one of them finding love in a way that will help them hopefully in the future. So I thought that was really powerful, that I enjoyed about it too, despite the melodramatics of some of the love stories. I'm like, oh, I'm glad they had this, because it definitely could have been a much darker film, even though it touches on a lot of very dark things.
I couldn't agree more. That's very, very well said. And the truth in my mind, actually, for most things. So
agreed.
Yeah. And
I agree.
Great performances as well, right? Like what you just said to me is in such an understated way communicated by Myrna Loy's character all
Oh,
through the movie. Right?
yes.
Such a brilliant performance. You can see the discomfort, you can see the sort of stranger danger that she has going on with her husband who's come back.
Yeah.
And she's probably not left her home and stayed up way past bedtime, going through club after club, which apparently Boone City, happening place,
I know,
like
really.
20
Yeah.
clubs. I'm like, what is
I
this
gotta go
place?
there. It seems like a party town, huh?
It's like, what is this place? It's
Like
hilarious. But
Vegas, you know?
apparently, yeah. Why aren't we all in Boone City? But
Yeah.
she's playing along, and she's
Mhm.
doing it because she knows this is difficult and she loves him, and it's also required. It is the medicine that is needed. And it's such a great performance. It's all on her face. It's
Mhm.
pretty amazing. That performance is a performance from modern times. It's not how people acted.
Right.
And
Back
to
then.
go
Yeah.
back to the melodramatic point, like
Right.
that could have been played in like the most melodramatic way possible, but
Mhm.
she doesn't. There are others who do that, but she doesn't.
Right, right, right. Yeah, definitely. No, I think this film too could be about really any war as well. Like you
Yeah.
could, unfortunately, because wars are continue to go on in the world, that you could have a version of this film after every single war that happens. And I'm sure that the experience of coming home is the same. I mean, maybe you're not working at a soda jerk stand, but it'd be like a Starbucks instead or something. But it's all
Right.
sadly the same kind of experience. But I guess then the positive way you could look at that is the solutions end the same every time.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
just showing love and compassion and finding that love in other people and being able to love and be loved is what helps you through trauma.
Totally. And sort of treatment and everything. Like back
Mm-hmm.
then, they didn't even have this term PTSD
I
or
know.
what do you
Yeah.
do? And they're like Dana Andrews' wife is like, snap out of it,
Right.
no,
Right.
no can do, it's just doesn't work that way. So yeah, there's something. Her character, by the way, we didn't mention her, Dana Andrews' wife character. She's also a very important, I think, portrayal.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure at that time, I mean, I don't know, I wasn't there, but people probably looked her as the bad girl or, what have you. But I think from today's eyes, it's a pretty important, real person. And I
Right.
sympathized with her that she married this guy 20 days before he left her. I don't know how long ago they met and how well they knew each other. And she has a different life. She also has different needs, and it's not like when he comes back, she's totally is dismissive of him.
Right. Right. Right.
She sort of wants to make this work, even though she's, you know, is more in for the glamour of the uniform and this
Exactly.
new life that could give her more money or more access. But these are all real feelings,
Mm-hmm.
and I sympathize that, okay, if this is not your true love person, why should you put up with
Right.
this new life that you didn't really sign up for? So I think it's a very real portrayal, and I'm glad that they had that, because not everybody, to your point of having love and support, not everybody's gonna get that. It doesn't work that
True.
way.
Or feel that. I mean, again, I sympathize
Yeah,
with
or
her
feel
character
that
too.
he
Like
can't feel it.
I get it, and it sucks,
Yeah.
but that's life too. And war
Mhm.
creates disruption to everyone
Mhm.
who's involved, even the folks in the home front. And you can't expect to just put everything back together again. And I think both of
Mhm.
them were struggling with that in their relationship, at least, like trying to find a new
Mhm.
way to balance their relationship now that he has back and has, PTSD, and she's kind of moved on in her life in many ways. And that's a very real portrayal that I'm sure happens more times than not, to be honest. I mean, I can't
For sure.
imagine trying to come back from an experience like being in World War II, or really just any war, and trying to restart a relationship and reground it. You're a different person, they're a different person. Like, it's impressive that relationships lasted, honestly, through war. Like, it's a very
It's
admirable when
amazing.
that can
Yeah.
happen.
Totally. And you see that with Myrna Loy and her husband's
Yes.
journey. It's very awkward in the beginning, even though these
Mm-hmm.
people have known each other for this whole time, but it's very, very awkward. It doesn't all come back together, but there is an underlying sense of, I guess, belonging or
Mm-hmm.
trust or something that they power through it.
Mm-hmm.
And they come to a relatively good place, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'm very glad you put this film, Best Years of Our Lives, on the list, because I wanted to watch it for a long time. Oscar-winning film from that year,
Yeah.
and it definitely held up to what I would expected it to be. Just a little, maybe could have been like 20 minutes shorter, but
I
I
agree.
definitely recommend watching this film if folks haven't seen or heard of it. It's definitely feels modern in a lot of ways because it's dealing with things that every war creates. And I think folks can relate to it if they've known people that have been in service and come back.
Mm-hmm. All right. So what is your number one?
So for my number one, we're moving from a real war to a fake one. Starship Troopers from 1997. This is directed by Paul Verhoeven, starring Casper Van Dien, Denise Richards, and Neil Patrick Harris. The IMDb plot summary: humans in a fascist, militaristic future wage war with giant alien bugs, which is basically what this movie is. So it's very simple to describe, but I think this movie actually is one of the more layered and complicated to comprehend films I think I've maybe ever seen, to be perfectly frank, and a movie that took me about 20 years to understand. And now I think it's a masterpiece and one of my favorite films. I think this really does highlight the impact, the negative impact that war can have on a society, and how a society constructs itself around war, and that if war is seen too much as a virtue and something that is necessary, how that can be weaponized throughout every single aspect of a society. And the chilling thing about this movie, and again, this took me literally 20 years to understand, is this movie is, and Paul's talked about this now, is being made as if it's a propaganda film being made inside of the universe that this film exists. Which is the extra layers. It just took me a long time to kind of figure that out as a viewer. I was too dumb as a teenager when I first saw this back in 97 to kind of get it. I didn't like this movie. I thought it was stupid. And now I just realized there's a lot more going on here that honestly is one of the more chilling films I've ever seen, to be honest, because of what it's presenting. Had you seen this film before?
I had not heard of it. I'd probably seen stills and scenes from it. But yeah, I had never watched it. It was really, I agree with you. I took it as that because I'm
you're much more intelligent
now.
than
no,
my
just
17-year-old
older.
me. Yeah, okay.
Not
okay.
a teenager.
Okay.
I probably would have had the same reaction, like, oh, what bugs are these? Where are they
Right.
from? No.
Yeah.
No, it's really what you said it is. And I think chilling is the right word to describe it. That imagine if this is all we knew, all of our lives and our jobs and success and achievement was all around this, what would that feel like? And I think the movie does a great job of capturing that, and even sort of the day-to-days of prom and leaving school, like it's also cleverly interwoven. Like there are moments where you almost feel like this is like a teen comedy, but it's all with the backdrop, and it's interwoven, like I was going to say, with this whole ecosystem that's all just about war and who gets to do what. When does somebody go there? Do you succeed? Do you fail? And the thing that I kept thinking about at the end of the movie and throughout either is that I get this is very chilling and horrifying. At the same time, they're never going to win.
That's the
these
point.
bugs.
Yeah, right. That's
exactly.
The point. Yeah.
But then the question that I kept asking was, then what do you do though? Like, do you just surrender and let them just take over? Or do you keep doing what they're doing? Or is there a different choice? Do you escape? Do you go somewhere else? Like, do you invest more money and science and such to find a new planet? Like, what do you do?
It never stops, and that's the very end of the movie. So there's a lot of great moments, much like in Verhoeven's RoboCop, where he used commercials in RoboCop to kind of comment on the society.
Amazing.
In this movie, he's using these little newsreels, and there's some great ones we can talk about. But the one at the very end, kind of going off your point, is they'll keep fighting and they'll win. Is how the movie ends. It's just endless war. There's never gonna, because they can't. If there was no war, this society would crumble. And they probably can't win, but they can't say that. And they have to say, oh, we will win eventually. We'll win eventually. And that's how these societies, especially these right-wing societies that are fascistic and built on war as the core of what they're doing, they can't have the war end. Because if the war ends, then all of a sudden their whole power structure crumbles, and the society can't function anymore. And I think the thing that makes this movie, in my mind, super chilling is this is in a way like a dystopian future, but it's not a dystopian future like a Mad Max where everything's falling apart. This society works and it's successful. And you, in a weird way, as an audience member, you're kind of pulled into it when you're like, yeah, let's get the bugs, or like there's cool
Yeah,
things
I
going on.
almost
There's hot
forget
actors.
at moments. Yeah.
Yeah, you're cheering it. And then you start to question, does that mean like I'm a fascist now? Because, or I think it shows that it's very easy to get caught up in this nationalistic, fascistic propaganda that happens and with every war. And it just shows you how easy, even as an audience member, you're able to kind of forget, wait a second, should I be cheering that they're doing this? Should I be cheering? But you are, because the movie is effective on those levels too, which I think is what Master Verhoeven can do in these situations.
Yeah. But so what is the answer to my question? What should they do?
Well, if you're in the power structure, the war will never stop. You'll have to invent either another war or find another enemy to fight.
No, I'm saying to save. My question is more on saving. Like, if this is what you're in, I mean, I get that part. Obviously, people at the power structure, they don't want to ever end this. I get that. But for a second, if you were to imagine that they were a group of people just thinking about what is a true way out of this.
Is
there another way out of this?
Oh yeah, it's always talking and negotiation, which is with the enemy, and that's what is so amazing about this film too, and the way that the whole movie they spend all this time othering the bugs. There's scenes where little kids are crushing cockroaches, like, oh, we're gonna kill the bugs, kill the bugs. You know, and there's even this great scene where there's a fake sort of talking head show, and the guy's like, I think the bugs might be smart, and the other person's like, a talking bug or a thinking smart bug, like that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, because they have to other the enemy. And at the end of the film, when they capture this brain bug, they call it, and Neil Patrick Harris, who has psychic powers, like communicating with it, he's like, oh, it's afraid. And then everyone cheers as if that's a good thing that your enemy has emotions. But I think that proves that if you did actually legitimately want to end this, the bugs are a high society that are high functioning. They have emotions. They have, you know, if you're watching it with the bug standpoint too, you'll see like that brain bug sort of protecting his or her young. So they have emotions and they care too. They probably want this war to end. So it all just, every war just comes down to talking to the other side. And that's where it's clear, and negotiating. But it's clear in this movie, they will never get, they'll never get there. They don't want to get there, right? The powers that be don't want to get there, and everyone else is brainwashed essentially into not wanting it either. They don't want to end it, which is the sad thing. Yeah,
I had the same feeling, and I kept thinking about Arrival, a movie that we've covered previously.
There you go, communication. Podcast. Yeah.
Exactly, which is exactly that. That let's talk to these people, let's get to know them, let's get to understand what is their motivation, because truly, there is nothing, I think, no matter what side you're on, that you can't sit down and talk through and figure out a way out.
Agreed.
There is always a way out.
Right. Oh, totally. But do you want to do that? And I think that's
you want to do that.
That's the question. Yeah. And what really resonated with me even now, and though again it went kind of all over my head at the time. You know, this movie came out in 1997, but in many ways, I feel this movie was my lived experience, similar lived experience to having to go through the Iraq War, which happened 6 years after this in the United States, in terms of how that was heavily propagandized. Every part of the media was rah war, calling the enemy bad, and all these sort of things. And I saw the society get kind of wrapped up in that, especially on the media, which is what I love about these news clips in here. And the fact that, Verhoeven was able to do this before the US at least went off the cliff with that, with, again, war on terror. When is that going to end? Oh, whenever we get rid of terror. Well, you can't get rid of terror. So they're trying to set up, like the Bush administration was trying to set up a same, mentality as the leaders in this film were. And there's even this great scene too, in the early on when they show, it's like a couple seconds, they show a map of like the galaxy, and they're like, here's the enemy planet. And then we're like 7,000 billion light years away from it. It's like, wait a second, like, why are we even over there then? Like, we're not even, it's not like they're any kind of threat to us whatsoever. And I was, again, thinking back to my time as a college student in the Iraq War, and sort of thinking about the same thing. Like, they're nowhere near us. It's just, you're making up this fake enemy that there's no reason for us to be even in this war in the first place. But they had to invent lies in the same way that in this society. You question, like, was that attack on Buenos Aires fake? Was that the government doing that just to give an excuse to continue to now have a path to fight the bug planet? Was that Mormon colony that was there, maybe they instigated the attack by the bugs? Like, you just don't know. And I think that's what makes this movie, again, so chilling and realistic, because can't really believe anything the media is saying when they're talking about war. And it's just the fact that he was able to pull this off in a movie that is also enjoyable on that other level, just as an action film. Again, I think this is one of the more complicated films that I've ever seen, and it really just about war, especially. That's why I had to put it on the top of the list, even though if this is 20 years ago, I did dismiss this film for a very, very long time. but I was dumb. So what can I do?
No. Well, I'm very glad to have watched it like now to sort of appreciate
Yeah.
it fully. So this was a great pick. And yeah, I would underline the media point. Like that is, we talked about class, we talked about the motivations of people at power, their selfish indulgences and such. But I think the other angle is media, because that's such a huge part of the connective tissue, I think, between the people at power and the people at large.
Yeah.
And how do you kind of mobilize, motivate, brainwash all of it? Like that is such a powerful tool. And going back to even Inglourious Bastard, like that's the power. The propaganda is such a huge aspect of this whole thing. If we didn't have a way to communicate in a mass way or tell stories in a way that could draw people in this fashion, none of this would even happen, I think.
Let's ban movies then. We'll solve war.
I guess no more podcasts for you.
I know. Oh no, we'll have to stop our podcast. Well, then this must keep going. but I think that just goes back again to that Truffaut quote about there's no such thing as an anti-war movie. I do believe that, as much as even Starship Troopers. You look at this and you're like, this is the most dystopian society you can imagine, but it's still enjoyable to watch. So then what is that really saying?
There you have it. Exactly. And you're cheering for these people, and you want them to succeed, and you're cheering for when she gets her like pilot license and what have you. Like, all of that, right? So pretty amazing.
Yeah, great film. So if anyone hasn't seen it, or if they saw Starship Troopers and just dismissed it like I did, give it another shot just with this lens of what Paul was trying to do, I think is maybe why it didn't do very well. It was big flop in the US, because I think it just went over people's heads too much. Paul's problem when he tries to make movies about America, it's too mirror in the face, and people don't want to see that. So then they don't go to Showgirls, they don't go to Starship Troopers. But I
mean, to be fair though, to him, I guess, like the way the movie is constructed and its look and its feel, I think that's very important. Like it has. Let me ask you this: did it feel sort of cheesy when it came out?
Yes,
that's the brilliance of it.
Yes,
like it's not. It's a satire. It's not meant to be realistic, which I think is so critical. Because if you made this in a way that it looked realistic, I think that would be. I don't know if I would be into that.
Right. You need the actors who look really good but aren't really good actors. You need the CW soap opera kind of plot lines in the first act.
Right.
It's all just like a very, very, but again, if you were in this society, they would make a very cheesy, war picture to try to get people to hate the bugs. In the same way that you can look at some of the other, World War II films or what have you that we haven't talked about in this podcast that are very much cheesy.
Yeah.
Because that makes for better propaganda. You know what I mean?
Totally. Speaking of, what were some movies that didn't make your list?
So a couple other movies that didn't make my list. Another Verhoeven movie, Black Book, Apocalypse Now, Kubrick movie we already talked about, Dr. Strangelove, Platoon, Battle of Algiers, and All Quiet on the Western Front, the original version, not the one on Netflix that I did not like. What about you? Which other movies were on your list?
I had Mrs. Miniver, also by William Wyler, which I think came right a year before or after.
Yeah, I think it was right before, but I might be wrong.
I think it was right before. Yeah. Dunkirk.
Nice.
To Be or Not to Be, which we covered on the podcast several months ago. Arrival, like we just mentioned. And I think that's it.
So with that, what are we covering next episode, Karan?
So next time we're going from war to historical figures. So we're going to have an episode on movies that shaped our view of historical figures. So very excited for that conversation.
Me too. Very fun. Great. Well, hope everyone enjoyed our discussion today, and let us know what movies you think of when you think of war. We're available on all podcast platforms and YouTube, where you can find our reviews for each movie we've covered. Please rate and review us, and don't forget to subscribe, as that really helps listeners find us and helps us get higher on the algorithm. Bye, Karan.
See you next time. I might be many things, but I'm definitely not your baby.